The envelope arrived like a declaration of war, crisp and white, with the Pinewood Meadows Homeowners Association letterhead glaring accusingly from the corner. Mark Thompson knew exactly what awaited him inside before he even broke the seal. Another complaint, another petty dictate about his property's appearance. He'd lived in the pristine suburban development for 7 years, each day feeling more like a prisoner in his own meticulously manicured slice of suburban paradise. His neighbors' yards were carbon copies of one another, identical landscaping, matching mailboxes, not a single blade of grass daring to grow out of place. And in the center of it all stood Mark's modest backyard, which had apparently become the neighborhood's greatest sin. The letter was vintage HOA, cold, clinical, and dripping with passive-aggressive superiority. "Dear Mr. Thompson," it began, "we have received multiple complaints regarding the unsightly outdoor cooking apparatus currently located in your backyard. Specifically, the portable grill purchased from Big Bob's Outdoor Supplies does not meet the aesthetic standards outlined in Section 4.2 of the Pinewood Meadows Community Guidelines." Mark read the phrase "unsightly outdoor cooking apparatus" 3 times, each repetition fueling the growing fire in his chest. His beloved grill, a birthday gift from his late father, had been more than just a cooking implement. There was a connection to memories of weekend barbecues, of his dad teaching him how to perfectly sear a steak, of laughter and family gatherings that seemed to grow more distant with each passing year. The HOA wanted him to remove it, replace it with something more aesthetically pleasing, as if cooking was just another performance to be judged by a committee of suburban aesthetes who probably couldn't tell the difference between a marinade and a moisturizer. Sarah, his wife, found him sitting at the kitchen table, the offending letters spread out before him like a battle map. She knew that look in his eyes, a combination of frustration and something else. Something dangerous. Mark wasn't the type to get mad. He got creative. "They can't do this," he muttered, more to himself than to Sarah. "They can't just tell me what I can and can't have in my own backyard." Sarah raised an eyebrow. She'd been married to Mark long enough to recognize the beginnings of one of his infamous projects, the time he built an elaborate rainwater collection system after their water bill spiked. The summer he constructed a chicken coop that looked more like an architectural marvel than a simple hen habitat. Each project was Mark's way of transforming bureaucratic frustration into an art form. "What are you thinking?" she asked, already knowing the answer would be both brilliant and slightly insane. Mark's lips curled into a smile that was equal parts mischief and engineering genius. "If they want aesthetically pleasing," he said, "I'll give them aesthetically pleasing." Outside, the modest Weber grill sat innocently in the backyard, unaware that it was about to become the catalyst for the most epic suburban rebellion Pinewood Meadows had ever seen. Mark was already sketching something on the back of the HOA letter, rough lines that would soon transform into plans for something far beyond a simple cooking apparatus. This was war, and Mark Thompson was about to make grilling an art form. The garage transformed into a war room of culinary rebellion. Blueprints, sketches, and engineering diagrams covered every available surface, pinned to walls and spread across Mark's workbench. What had started as a simple act of defiance was quickly becoming an obsession. A meticulously planned architectural marvel that would make the HOA rue the day they challenged him. Mark's background as a mechanical engineer at a local aerospace company gave him an unprecedented advantage. He was used to designing complex systems, calculating stress points, and turning seemingly impossible concepts into reality. His colleagues often joked that he could engineer his way out of any problem, and now he was about to prove them right. The initial concept was deceptively simple: a barbecue pit that wasn't just a grill, but a statement. Not just any statement, a volcanic eruption of culinary creativity that would make Gordon Ramsay look like an amateur and send the HOA into a bureaucratic meltdown. "Honey, can you pass me the titanium-grade welding rods?" He called out to Sarah, who had long since learned that when Mark was in project mode, it was best to be a supportive assistant and occasional voice of reason. Sarah peered into the garage, a mixture of amusement and concern crossing her face. "Are you seriously building what I think you're building?" Mark looked up, his eyes gleaming with the same passion he'd once reserved for aerospace design. "They want aesthetically pleasing? I'll give them a masterpiece. This isn't just a grill. This is going to be a functional work of art." The plans revealed an increasingly complex design. A multi-tiered barbecue pit shaped like a volcanic structure, complete with realistic rock formations, strategic cooking surfaces, and most audaciously, a mechanism that would allow controlled eruptions of flame and smoke. Each level was meticulously calculated for optimal heat distribution, cooking efficiency, and maximum visual impact. Most suburban homeowners would have been satisfied with a simple no to the HOA or a standard replacement grill. But Mark Thompson wasn't most homeowners. He was a man who saw challenges as opportunities for extraordinary solutions. His neighbor, Tom Rodriguez, discovered this firsthand when he wandered over during Mark's initial fabrication stage. Tom was a landscape architect with a reputation for playing by the rules, the exact opposite of Mark's rebellious spirit. "You're going to get into serious trouble," Tom warned, watching Mark weld a particularly intricate section of the volcanic structure. "The HOA doesn't mess around." Mark didn't even look up from his welding. They mess around with the wrong person this time. The garage echoed with the sound of metal being shaped, cut, and transformed. Sparks flew like miniature fireworks, each one representing another layer of Mark's increasingly elaborate plan. What had begun as a response to a petty complaint was becoming something legendary. Sarah watched from the doorway, a mix of love, concern, and reluctant admiration on her face. She knew her husband well enough to understand that this was no longer just about a grill. This was about making a statement. This was about pushing back against mindless conformity. This was about proving that creativity and individual expression couldn't be contained by narrow-minded regulations. Little did the Pinewood Meadows HOA know, but they had just unleashed a force of nature, part engineer, part artist, and completely unstoppable. The first weekend of construction brought unexpected attention. What Mark had imagined as a private rebellion quickly became a neighborhood spectacle. Trucks delivering specialized materials, complex scaffolding rising in his backyard, and the constant symphony of power tools drew curious and increasingly concerned looks from his neighbors. Mrs. Edith Hartwell, the HOA's most zealous board member, was the first to arrive. Her sensible beige pantsuit and pursed lips were a stark contrast to the chaotic construction site Mark had created. She marched up the driveway like a general approaching enemy territory, her clipboard clutched tightly against her chest. "Mr. Thompson," she called out, her voice as sharp as a freshly honed kitchen knife, "I demand to know what exactly is happening here." Mark barely looked up from his welding station. A custom-fabricated heat-resistant coating was being applied to what looked like an impossibly complex series of cooking surfaces. "Just doing some backyard improvements, Mrs. Hartwell," he responded with studied casualness. Tom Rodriguez, who had been helping Mark with some of the more intricate landscaping elements, suppressed a laugh. They both knew this was far more than some backyard improvements. The structure was taking shape, a massive, multi-tiered volcanic formation that looked like it had been ripped from the pages of a high-end architectural magazine. Layers of carefully sculpted rock-like surfaces intertwined with cutting-edge grilling technology. Precision-engineered cooking zones were strategically placed at different elevations, each designed to provide perfect heat for different types of food. But it was the special effects that would truly set this BBQ pit apart. Mark had incorporated a sophisticated system of propane lines, smoke generators, and carefully placed flame jets that would create the illusion of a living, breathing volcanic landscape. At the push of a button, the entire structure could simulate a controlled eruption, complete with dramatic flames, strategic smoke plumes, and heat distribution system that would make professional chefs weep with joy. "This," Mark explained to Tom as Mrs. Hartwell sputtered in the background, "is going to be more than just a grill. This is culinary performance art." Sarah watched from the kitchen window, simultaneously impressed and terrified. She knew her husband's reputation for turning mundane projects into extraordinary experiences. The neighborhood barbecue was about to become something legendary. Mrs. Hartwell's clipboard trembled with indignation. "This is absolutely against every single regulation in our community guidelines," she sputtered. Mark finally turned to face her, a welding mask pushed up on his forehead, tiny sparks of metal still dancing around him like a technological halo. "I'm quite certain," he said with calculated calm, "that there's nothing in the guidelines that specifically prohibits a fully functional volcanic barbecue pit." The challenge was clear. This was no longer just about a grill. This was a battle of wills, a suburban rebellion cast in steel, propane, and sheer audacious creativity. As if on cue, a test run of the smoke and flame system kicked in. Dramatic plumes of strategically colored smoke began to rise from the structure, catching the afternoon's sunlight. Tom took a step back, genuinely impressed by the engineering marvel taking shape. Mrs. Hartwell looked like she might spontaneously combust. Mark Thompson just smiled. The first eruption was about to begin, and it wasn't just going to be about cooking. The HOA's legal response arrived precisely 3 days after Mrs. Hartwell's initial reconnaissance mission. A thick manila envelope landed in Mark's mailbox, its weight suggesting the magnitude of the impending bureaucratic assault. Sarah intercepted the delivery, her fingers tracing the certified mail stamp with a mixture of dread and anticipation. "They're serious this time," she called out to Mark, who was in the backyard making final adjustments to the volcanic masterpiece. The structure now dominated their backyard, a testament to engineering prowess and unbridled creativity. Geological accurate rock formations blended seamlessly with state-of-the-art grilling technology, creating a culinary landscape that was part art installation, part cooking marvel. Mark's lawyer, Frank Delgado, was cut from the same unconventional cloth. A former engineer turned attorney, he specialized in what he called creative property disputes. The moment Mark had called him, Frank knew this was going to be more than just another HOA complaint. They're citing multiple violations, Frank explained during an emergency meeting in Mark's garage, spreading out the HOA's legal documents like a battle map. Exterior structure modifications, non-standard landscaping, potential safety hazards. They're throwing everything they've got at you. But Mark was prepared. Each potential complaint had been meticulously addressed during the design phase. The volcanic BBQ pit wasn't just a rebellious statement. It was a carefully engineered marvel that met, and often exceeded, every possible building and safety regulation. The propane systems were certified to industrial standards. The structural integrity had been calculated by a professional engineer. Even the smoke and flame effects were designed with precision. More controlled theatrical display than random fire hazard. Mark had effectively built a culinary weapon that was legally bulletproof. Tom Rodriguez, still helping with the project, couldn't help but be impressed. "You've thought of everything," he muttered, examining the intricate heat distribution system that would make professional chefs weep with joy. The neighborhood watched with a mixture of horror and fascination. What had started as a simple grill replacement had become a full-blown suburban insurgency. Neighbors peeked over fences, smartphone cameras at the ready, capturing every stage of the volcanic BBQ pit's construction. Frank's eyes gleamed with the same rebellious spirit that drove Mark. "They want to fight? We'll give them a fight they'll never forget." The legal documents became a game of bureaucratic chess. For every violation the HOA cited, Mark and Frank had a meticulously documented counterargument. Zoning regulations were examined, building codes dissected, and safety standards scrutinized with surgical precision. Sarah watched her husband with a combination of love and disbelief. Mark had always been stubborn, but this was something else entirely. This was a man who refused to be told what he could do in his own backyard. This was a man who turned a petty complaint into a full-scale architectural rebellion. As evening fell, the volcanic BBQ pit stood illuminated, a glowing testament to individual creativity. Subtle LED lighting made the rock formations come alive, casting dramatic shadows across the perfectly engineered cooking surfaces. It was more than a grill. It was a statement. Mrs. Hartwell and the HOA board would soon learn that they had awakened a force of nature. Mark Thompson wasn't just fighting a battle. He was starting a revolution, one perfectly seared steak at a time. The day of the hearing arrived with an electricity that transformed Pinewood Meadows into something between a circus and a courtroom drama. What was supposed to be a routine HOA board meeting had become the most anticipated event in suburban history. Mark arrived dressed in his most conservative suit, a calculated move that was part legal strategy, part psychological warfare. Sarah sat beside him, her presence a silent but powerful support system. Frank Delgado, looking like a predatory eagle in a tailored charcoal gray ensemble, spread their documentation across the conference table with the precision of a military strategist. The community center's meeting room could barely contain the crowd. Neighbors who had previously only exchanged polite waves now sat shoulder to shoulder, smartphone cameras at the ready. Tom Rodriguez had somehow secured a prime seat near the front, a knowing smile playing across his lips. Mrs. Edith Hartwell, leading the HOA board, looked like she had aged 10 years since first discovering Mark's volcanic creation. Her usual crisp demeanor was frayed at the edges, her perfectly pressed blazer slightly rumpled, a visual metaphor for the HOA's crumbling authority. "Mr. Thompson," she began, her voice quavering slightly, "your so-called barbecue installation represents a clear and present danger to the aesthetic and structural integrity of our community." Frank was on his feet before she could finish. "On the contrary," he countered, spreading out a series of professionally prepared documents, "my client has not only met but exceeded every single building and safety regulation in the Pinewood Meadows community guidelines." What followed was less a hearing and more a surgical dismantling of the HOA's arguments. Engineering reports, safety certifications, architectural drawings, each document was a precision-crafted missile aimed at the heart of the HOA's case. Mark had transformed his rebellious project into an irrefutable masterpiece of compliance. The volcanic BBQ pit wasn't just a cooking apparatus. It was a work of art that happened to grill the most perfect steaks in suburban history. Thermal imaging showed perfect heat distribution. Custom-designed emissions systems met and exceeded local environmental regulations. Even the landscaping had been meticulously planned to complement the existing neighborhood aesthetic. Tom leaned over to the neighbor beside him. "He's not just fighting," he whispered. "He's making a statement about creativity and individual expression." As the hearing progressed, a tide began to turn. Neighbors who had initially viewed Mark as a troublemaker now saw him as something else, a champion of individual creativity. Whispers of support grew louder. Smartphones captured every moment of the confrontation. Sarah watched her husband with a mix of pride and disbelief. Mark had done more than defend a barbecue pit. He had challenged an entire system of mindless conformity. The climax came when Frank produced the final piece of evidence, a comprehensive video presentation showcasing the volcanic BBQ pit in all its glory. Drone footage revealed a structure that was part engineering marvel, part culinary masterpiece. Slow-motion shots of perfectly seared steaks, dramatic eruption sequences, and a landscape integration that looked like it had been designed by a team of world-class architects. Mrs. Hartwell's clipboard trembled. The other board members exchanged uncomfortable glances. Furthermore, Frank concluded, his voice cutting through the tension like a scalpel, my client is prepared to offer a community barbecue, demonstrating the full capabilities of this remarkable culinary installation, should the board wish to see it in action. The room fell silent. The volcanic BBQ pit had become more than a personal project. It was now a referendum on creativity, individuality, and the very nature of community rules. Mark Thompson sat perfectly still, the eye of a storm he had meticulously engineered. The hearing was drawing to a close, but the real battle was just beginning.